May 27, 1940, near L'Épinette, outside Béthune, France. Captain John Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Churchill, age 33, 2nd Battalion, Manchester Regiment, British Expeditionary Force. At first light, the fields north of Béthune lay under a low ceiling of gray cloud. The previous night's artillery had churned the ground into shallow craters filled with rainwater. The air carried the sharp smell of cordite and turned soil. In the distance, German armored columns continued their advance toward the Channel, cutting off British and French forces and compressing them into an ever-tightening pocket around Dunkirk. Captain Churchill stood apart from the men of his company, not out of distance but from habit. He was tall, lean, and carried himself with a composure that suggested peacetime ceremony rather than retreat under fire. Slung over his shoulder was a longbow of yew. At his side hung a Scottish basket-hilt broadsword. Across his back, a standard-issue British officer's webbing set held his pistol and field equipment. To the men around him, the bow and sword were not decorations. They had seen him carry them before. Churchill had joined the Manchester Regiment in 1926. Before the war, he had competed internationally in archery and represented Britain at the World Archery Championships. He had also trained as a commando in mind and temperament long before such formations formally existed. When the British Expeditionary Force deployed to France in 1939, he brought with him not only modern kit, but weapons centuries old. He did so without irony. By late May 1940, the BEF was no longer maneuvering, it was withdrawing. German Army Group A had driven through the Ardennes, crossed the Meuse, and reached the coast at Abbeville. The British and French forces in northern France were now isolated. The order was clear: delay the enemy long enough for evacuation to begin. Churchill's battalion had been assigned to hold positions near Béthune to slow the German advance. The ground offered little natural defense: flat farmland, scattered hedgerows, narrow roads bordered by drainage ditches. Visibility was limited by low hedges and occasional farm structures. German units, supported by artillery and armored vehicles, probed constantly. Shortly after 700 hours, forward scouts reported movement along a tree line approximately 250 yards to the east. Churchill ordered his platoons to hold fire. Ammunition was limited. Every round had to count. The 1st German infantry section emerged cautiously from cover, rifles at the ready. They advanced in short rushes, testing for resistance. Churchill observed through field glasses. The range closed to roughly 200 yards. He lowered the glasses and removed the longbow from his shoulder. Accounts from men present describe what followed with consistency. Churchill nocked an arrow, drew to full extension, and loosed it. The arrow traveled in a shallow arc across the open ground. One German soldier fell. It was, by most records, the last confirmed kill in British military history by longbow in active combat. The psychological effect exceeded the tactical one. The sudden, silent strike disrupted the German advance. For a moment, uncertainty replaced momentum. Churchill then signaled his men to open fire. Rifles cracked along the hedgerow. A Bren gun team established suppressive fire from a shallow ditch. The German unit withdrew, leaving casualties behind. The engagement did not alter the course of the campaign. It bought minutes, perhaps an hour. In May 1940, minutes mattered. By the end of that week, the British line had contracted toward Dunkirk. Churchill and his men fought a series of rearguard actions, falling back under constant pressure. On June 1st, they reached the perimeter near the beaches. Evacuation ships crowded the horizon. Luftwaffe aircraft circled overhead. Churchill boarded a vessel and returned to England. The campaign in France was over for him, but the war was not. June 1944, Adriatic coast, Italy. Lieutenant Colonel John Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Churchill, Commanding Officer, No. 2 Commando. 4 years after Dunkirk, Churchill was no longer a company commander in retreat. He now led a commando unit trained for offensive operations, raids, amphibious assaults, rapid strikes against fortified positions. The British commandos had been forged in the early years of the war to carry the fight back to occupied Europe. On the night of May 14, 1944, No. 2 Commando approached the island of Brač off the Dalmatian coast of Yugoslavia. The mission was to disrupt German garrisons and gather intelligence in support of partisan operations. The island's terrain was rugged, rocky ridges, sparse vegetation, narrow paths cut through limestone. Churchill moved with the forward elements as they advanced inland. German resistance stiffened near the village of Bol. Machine gun fire from elevated positions pinned sections down among stone walls and terraces. Churchill carried a Scottish claymore and a set of bagpipes in addition to his standard armament. Just before the assault on a German position, he reportedly played a brief tune on the pipes, a personal signal as much as a gesture of defiance. Then he led the charge. The assault succeeded in overrunning several enemy positions. However, German reinforcements arrived quickly. Mortar rounds began falling among the commandos, casualties mounted, communications faltered. By dawn, Churchill found himself with a small group of survivors under increasing fire. Ammunition ran low. German troops maneuvered to encircle. Churchill ordered a fighting withdrawal toward the extraction point. During the movement, an explosion, likely from a mortar round, knocked him unconscious. When he regained awareness, he was surrounded by German soldiers. He was captured. German officers, upon discovering his name and background, noted his surname, Churchill. Suspecting a relation to the British Prime Minister, they transferred him for interrogation. He was eventually transported to Sachsenhausen concentration camp, north of Berlin, reserved in part for high-profile prisoners. Conditions there were harsh but distinct from extermination camps. Prisoners included political detainees and military officers. Churchill did not remain passive. In September 1944, he participated in an escape attempt through a tunnel. The attempt failed. He was recaptured near Rostock and transferred again, eventually moved across Germany as Allied forces advanced from both west and east. In April 1945, with the Third Reich collapsing, he was liberated by advancing American forces in northern Italy after being moved south. The war in Europe ended weeks later. Churchill returned to Britain. He did not retire quietly. After the war, he served in Palestine during the final years of the British Mandate and later in Australia as an instructor. He remained in the army until 1959. The episode most often associated with him, the capture of 42 German soldiers, occurred during earlier commando operations in Norway in 1941. December 27, 1941, Operation Archery, Vaagso Island, Norway. Churchill, then second in command of No. 3 Commando, took part in a raid designed to destroy German fish oil factories used in the production of glycerin for explosives. The operation involved naval bombardment followed by amphibious landings. As commandos pushed into the town of Molloy, resistance intensified. German defenders occupied buildings overlooking narrow streets. Snipers fired from upper windows. Machine guns swept intersections. Churchill moved forward with assault teams clearing structures room by room. Using grenades and close-quarters tactics, the commandos forced German soldiers to surrender in groups. By the end of the engagement, approximately 98 Germans had been captured across the island, with Churchill directly involved in the capture of dozens during his sector's advance. Accounts vary on the exact number attributed personally to him. Contemporary reports and later biographies frequently cite 42 prisoners taken under his direct control during one action, though the broader tally involved coordinated efforts by multiple commandos. What remains consistent is his method: aggressive forward movement, rapid assault before defenders could reorganize, and the calculated use of shock. He carried his sword during the raid. In urban combat within Malloy's confined streets, visibility was limited to tens of yards. German defenders, accustomed to conventional infantry assaults, confronted commandos moving quickly and decisively. The sight of an officer leading from the front with unconventional weapons added to the disorientation. By the end of the operation, the fish oil factories were destroyed. British losses totaled 20 killed and 53 wounded. German casualties were heavier, and nearly 100 were taken prisoner. The raid demonstrated the viability of commando operations and forced Germany to divert additional troops to Norway. Churchill's role reinforced his reputation among his men. He was not reckless, he calculated risk and acted within it. His weapons, archaic in appearance, did not replace modern arms, they supplemented them. The sword was used primarily in close combat and as a symbol of offensive intent. The longbow in Norway was less practical than in France, but he carried it when feasible. The capture of 42 Germans was not the result of a single dramatic standoff. It emerged from coordinated assault, disciplined training, and the momentum of a raid executed with precision. Churchill's wartime record does not fit easily into caricature. He was neither a detached eccentric nor mythic hero. He was a trained officer who believed that initiative and audacity could unbalance a stronger opponent. In 1940, on a field outside Béthune, he used a longbow because he judged the moment suitable. In Norway, he carried a sword into close combat because he intended to lead from the front. War is shaped by logistics, production, and grand strategy. It is also shaped by individuals making immediate decisions under constraint. Churchill's actions occurred within larger operations: Dunkirk's evacuation, commando raids along occupied coasts, the grinding Italian campaign. None were decided by a single man, yet within each, moments existed where leadership at platoon or company level altered outcomes measured in minutes and lives saved. He received the Military Cross and Bar for his service. He survived captivity in a collapsing Reich. He lived until 1996, long enough to see the war become history rather than memory. The longbow he carried in France did not change the trajectory of 1940. The sword at Vaagso did not end the occupation of Norway, but in specific, measurable instances, an enemy advance halted briefly, a garrison overwhelmed, prisoners secured, they mattered. On May 27, 1940, in a rain-soaked field near Béthune, an arrow flew across 200 yards of contested ground. It struck a single soldier in a vast war. The act did not alter the map of Europe. It did, however, demonstrate that even in mechanized conflict dominated by tanks and aircraft, war remained, at its core, a contest of human will expressed through immediate action. John Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Churchill acted according to his convictions about leadership and initiative. He led from the front. He accepted personal risk. He understood that morale, both his own men's and the enemy's, was a factor as real as ammunition count. When the war ended, he returned to a world reshaped by forces far beyond any one soldier. Yet his record remains, documented in unit histories, operational reports, and the recollections of those who served beside him. History often remembers the vast movements of armies and the signatures on surrender documents. It should also remember the individuals who, within those movements, chose to advance when retreat was possible, to lead when concealment was safer, and to carry their convictions into battle. Churchill's career after Vaagso and before his capture in 1944 unfolded across a series of coastal raids and amphibious operations that defined the British commando effort in the middle years of the war. These actions were rarely decisive in isolation. They were designed to force the German high command to disperse forces along thousands of miles of coastline, to test tactics, and to gather intelligence for larger operations still to come. In early 1942, Churchill was promoted and continued serving with No. 2 Commando. The unit trained along the Scottish coast, often in severe weather, practicing landings from motor launches and assault craft onto rocky shores under live fire conditions. The emphasis was on speed and violence of action. Land, strike, withdraw before enemy reinforcements could concentrate. Churchill insisted on physical endurance. Forced marches across moorland carrying full kit were common. Live fire exercises emphasized controlled aggression, short bursts from Sten guns at close range, immediate movement after grenades detonated, rapid consolidation once an objective was secured. He maintained the habit of carrying his sword during certain exercises, not as theatrics, but as reinforcement of a principle. Officers were to be visible at the point of contact. By mid-1943, Allied strategy in the Mediterranean shifted from North Africa to the invasion of Sicily and mainland Italy. Churchill's commando unit was committed to these operations. On July 10, 1943, during Operation Husky, British forces landed along the southeastern coast of Sicily. The terrain inland rose quickly into rugged hills and narrow roads that favored defenders. Churchill's unit was tasked with seizing key positions to prevent German demolition of infrastructure critical to the Allied advance. In several instances, small groups of commandos advanced ahead of larger formations to secure road junctions and bridges. These actions required coordination measured in minutes. If a demolition charge was triggered before arrival, an advance could stall for hours or days. In one engagement near the town of Lentini, German rearguard elements occupied stone buildings overlooking a narrow approach road. Churchill organized an assault element of fewer than 24 men. They advanced using drainage ditches and walls for cover, closing to within 50 yards before launching grenades through windows. Resistance collapsed quickly. Several German soldiers were killed, others surrendered. The road remained intact. Such engagements rarely produced dramatic casualty figures. They produced continuity, an uninterrupted line of advance, preserved logistics, and reduced delay. Churchill's leadership style emphasized decisiveness once contact was made. Hesitation allowed defenders to reorganize. Momentum forced surrender. In September 1943, the Allies invaded mainland Italy at Salerno. German forces responded with counterattacks that nearly drove the beachhead into the sea. Commandos were deployed to seize high ground and block armored thrusts toward the coast. Churchill's unit moved inland through olive groves and terraced slopes. German artillery fire swept exposed ridgelines. Visibility varied between 100 and 300 yards depending on elevation and vegetation. Churchill positioned Bren gun teams to cover likely avenues of approach, while assault groups maneuvered to flank machine gun nests. During one counterattack, German infantry advanced in extended order across open ground toward a commando-held ridge. Churchill directed concentrated fire from interlocking positions. The engagement lasted less than 15 minutes. Several German soldiers were killed, others withdrew. The ridge remained in British hands. These were incremental gains measured against a broader campaign marked by attrition. The Italian theater demanded persistence. Rain turned roads to mud. Supply lines stretched from beaches through mountain passes vulnerable to ambush. Casualties accumulated slowly. By early 1944, Churchill had become commanding officer of No. 2 Commando. His responsibilities expanded beyond leading assault teams. He now managed training schedules, logistics, coordination with naval assets, and integration with Allied units, including American formations and local resistance groups. The raid on the island of Brač in May 1944 represented a continuation of commando doctrine: strike, disrupt, withdraw. Yet by this stage of the war, German defensive networks were more entrenched. Intelligence was imperfect. The margin for error narrowed. On the night landing, sea conditions were moderate. Motor launches approached under cover of darkness. Churchill disembarked among the first wave. The objective was to destroy enemy positions and withdraw before daylight allowed German aircraft to intervene. Initial resistance was lighter than expected. Patrols advanced along narrow paths lined with stone walls. The commandos moved in sections of 6 to 8 men, maintaining visual contact. At approximately 0300 hours, near the outskirts of Bol, German sentries engaged. Fire spread quickly. Churchill ordered an immediate assault on the nearest machine gun position. He moved forward with 2 sections, covering approximately 80 yards under intermittent fire. Grenades cleared the first emplacement. A second, positioned higher on a terrace, required flanking movement. Casualties mounted as mortar rounds began landing behind the assaulting troops, indicating that German forces were coordinating a response. As dawn approached, the element of surprise diminished. German reinforcements arrived from inland positions. Churchill attempted to consolidate and withdraw toward the extraction point. During this maneuver, a mortar round exploded close enough to render him unconscious. When he regained awareness, he was disarmed and under guard. The raid had failed to achieve its broader objectives. Several commandos were killed or captured. Others withdrew successfully. Churchill's subsequent imprisonment removed him from combat during the final year of the war in Europe, yet his earlier actions remained part of the evolving narrative of commando warfare. The claim that he personally captured 42 German soldiers during Operation Archery must be understood within the context of coordinated assault. Commando raids relied on speed, shock, and aggressive leadership. In Molloy's confined streets, once resistance began to fracture, surrender could spread rapidly. A group of German soldiers, isolated from command and under pressure from grenades and close-quarters assault, might capitulate together. Churchill's presence at the forefront of these engagements meant that prisoners taken in his sector often surrendered directly to him or under his immediate control. The figure of 42 reflects cumulative captures during a specific phase of fighting rather than a single dramatic encirclement. It was a product of tempo and coordination. In evaluating his legacy, it is essential to separate embellishment from documented record. He did carry a longbow into combat in France. He did lead commando assaults in Norway and Italy. He was captured in 1944 and held in German custody until near the end of the war. He received decorations for gallantry. He did not alter the strategic direction of World War II. Few individuals did. What he demonstrated was a consistent pattern of forward leadership under fire, reliance on disciplined training, and an understanding that morale and surprise were force multipliers. After the war, Churchill remained active in outdoor pursuits, surfing in Australia, participating in military training, and maintaining physical conditioning. Those who served under him described a commander who expected competence and calm under pressure. The image of a British officer advancing across a French field with a longbow in 1940 persists because it contrasts sharply with the mechanized character of the conflict. Yet mechanization did not eliminate the human element. Decisions still occurred at the level of individuals confronting immediate threat. On Vaagso Island, in narrow streets between fish oil factories and warehouses, Churchill advanced because delay would have allowed defenders to regroup. In Sicily and at Salerno, he positioned men carefully because terrain dictated survival. On Brač, he attempted withdrawal because remaining meant annihilation. These decisions were practical, not theatrical. When the war concluded in Europe on May 8, 1945, Churchill was 39 years old. He had served through the collapse of France, the rise of specialized commando forces, Mediterranean amphibious assaults, and imprisonment in a collapsing regime. He retired from the army in 1959 with the rank of lieutenant colonel. The world he left behind was entering a different strategic era: nuclear deterrence, decolonization, shifting alliances. The age of swords and long bows had long passed, if it had ever truly remained. Yet the record endures in official citations, war diaries, and regimental histories. It records dates, locations, casualty figures, and outcomes. It notes the capture of German prisoners during Operation Archery. It confirms his presence in France in 1940 and Italy in 1944. It documents his escape attempt and recapture. History does not require embellishment to recognize resolve. The fields near Béthune are quiet now. Vaagsø's harbor functions as a Norwegian coastal town once more. The ridges above Salerno overlook roads used by civilians unaware of the firefights that once unfolded there. John Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Churchill lived into his 80s. He did not present himself as legend. Those who encountered him in later years described a reserved man with a direct manner. The war was something he had done, not something he performed. When examining the record, the phrase, "they called him Mad Jack," reflects the perception of those who saw unconventional weapons in modern war. What remains, beyond the nickname, is documented service across multiple campaigns, participation in raids that shaped Commando doctrine, and the capture of enemy soldiers during close quarters fighting in Norway. In the end, the significance lies not in novelty but in example, leadership under fire, measured aggression, and adherence to duty within a vast and impersonal conflict. As the generation that fought the Second World War passes from living memory, preservation depends on disciplined recounting, dates, units, terrain, outcomes. Within those details are individuals who acted with clarity under pressure. Their names remain in the archives. It is there that their record stands.